The kingdom of Umuozu was a land of both beauty and contradiction. Nestled between green rolling hills and bordered by the river Enyimba, it was known across the southeastern lands for its fertile soils, colorful festivals, and the palace that stood tall like a crown on the highest hill. But beyond the golden ornaments and flowing palm wine, the people lived under the shadow of one man, King Ebuka. Ebuka was not born into greatness. He seized it. A warrior in his youth, he had risen to power through bloodshed during the War of the Three Clans. The throne was earned by the blade, and no one questioned the authority of a man who had once single-handedly taken down the infamous warlord of Ndiugwu. When the elders crowned him, the people cheered, hoping he would bring peace. And at first, he did. But power, as the elders say, is a bitter kola nut, sweet in promise but bitter on the tongue. The more Ebuka tasted it, the more intoxicated he became. By his 5th year on the throne, Ebuka had already married 9 wives. By the 10th year, he had 23. And by his 15th year, even the palace scribes had stopped counting. Every few moons, a new bride would arrive at the palace gates, some willing, many not. Daughters of chiefs, widows, virgins, and even married women, none were beyond the reach of the king's desire. The law bowed to his pleasure. The priests called it destiny. The people, however, called it what it truly was, tyranny. "He is the lion who eats what he pleases," the old women muttered at the stream. "He is not a king, but a curse wrapped in a crown," said the farmers under their breath. But no one dared raise their voice beyond a whisper. Men who spoke too loud found their farms burned or their daughters summoned to the palace for service. Ebuka's harem became a thing of legend. His palace compound was split into quarters, each named after a season: Udu-Miri, rain; Oka, harvest; Uguru, harmattan; and Ogbochi, dry heat. His wives were not allowed to leave without permission. Some lived in luxury, others faded into ghosts, wandering the palace grounds with hollow eyes, shadows of who they used to be. What the king could not have through charm, he took through command. There was no shame, no consequence. And as the high priest continued to bless his rule, Ebuka believed himself untouchable, a god in human flesh. Yet even gods have blind spots, and for King Ebuka, her name was Chidinma. The tale of Chidinma had not yet begun, but already her name was being spoken in hushed tones in a different part of Umuozu, far from the gilded palace, among the dirt paths and muddy markets. There, a girl moved with the quiet confidence of someone who did not know her beauty was dangerous. But back at the palace, Ebuka sat on his throne with a calabash of palm wine in hand and his legs lazily crossed. A musician strummed a 4-stringed ogene in the background, and a wife knelt at his feet, massaging his ankles. "Bring me something new," he said suddenly, his voice bored. "I'm tired of all the faces I see. I want a new flower, one that hasn't yet bloomed in my garden." The royal guard bowed. "Yes, Igwe, do you have someone in mind?" Ebuka grinned and took a deep gulp of wine. "No, but the gods will guide your eyes. Go to the market tomorrow. I feel like tasting something fresh." And just like that, a storm began to gather. One no one, not even the mighty king, could see coming. The sun had barely stretched above the tree line when Chidinma began her daily walk to the market. Her bare feet knew the path well, a winding trail of red soil dotted with smooth stones and the scent of wet earth. She carried a woven basket on her head filled with vegetables, bitterleaf, okra, ugu, and scent leaf, all freshly harvested from the tiny backyard garden behind their mud house. At 17, Chidinma was already the pillar of her household. Her father had died when she was just a child, leaving behind a blind mother and an unborn brother who never made it into the world. The grief had hollowed out their family, but Chidinma had stepped up, growing into a young woman with strength far beyond her years. What she lacked in wealth, she made up for in grace. Her skin was the color of smooth mahogany, her hair thick and always tied in neat braids, and her voice, soft but firm, often calmed angry buyers at the market. To the men of Umuozu, she was a rare beauty. To the women, she was a mystery, untouched, unaffected, and fiercely independent. She had turned down suitors from 3 villages and refused to attend dances where young men flaunted their family names. When asked why she remained unclaimed, Chidinma would smile and say, "I am already married to duty." She never imagined her refusal would attract the gaze of a king. That morning at the market, Chidinma was busy arranging her vegetables when a hush fell over the stalls. She looked up and saw 4 royal guards weaving through the crowd. The traders froze. Children were pulled behind mothers. Young women looked away, some with fear, others with false hope. The guard stopped in front of Chidinma's stall. "You," the leader said, pointing at her. "What is your name?" She stood up slowly, confused. "Chidinma, daughter of Olanma." The guard looked her over with sharp, measuring eyes. "You are to come with us to the palace. The Igwe has summoned you." Chidinma's heart thumped. "Summoned me? For what?" "It is not your place to ask questions," the guard said, his tone heavy with finality. "Gather your things." "I will not go," she said quietly, but with steel in her voice. "I do not belong to the king." A gasp swept through the traders. No one refused a royal summons, certainly not a girl of her standing. The guard's face hardened. "Do not make this difficult. The Igwe has chosen you for his court. Your presence is a privilege." Chidinma looked around. The market women looked away. Not one stepped forward to defend her. Her mother was blind, her home defenseless. What choice did she really have? Still, she shook her head. "Tell the Igwe I am not a bird to be plucked from the air." The guards hesitated, clearly unprepared for her refusal. Then, reluctantly, they turned and left. But the king did not take rejection lightly. That night, the village was quiet. Crickets chirped beneath the still air, and the moon cast pale silver light across rooftops. Inside her hut, Chidinma lay awake beside her mother, staring at the ceiling, heart pounding. Then she heard it, the footsteps. By the time she rose and lit a lamp, the door burst open. Shadows flooded in. "Take her!" a voice barked. Her mother screamed. Chidinma struggled, but the men were too strong. They gagged her, tied her hands, and dragged her out into the night like a criminal. One of the guards knocked over the basket of herbs she had prepared for morning sales, spilling them across the dirt. The last thing she saw before the blindfold was her mother crawling on the floor, reaching out, weeping. When the cloth was pulled from her eyes, she was in the palace. The marble floors, the tall pillars, the overwhelming scent of perfume and incense. The guards bowed and parted to reveal the man who had summoned her. King Ebuka sat on his throne, legs spread, golden rings on each finger. His eyes wandered lazily over her body like she was cattle. "You are as beautiful as the whispers said," he said. Chidinma said nothing, her jaw clenched. "I could have had you brought here as a wife. Instead, I will make you mine without title. A man tires of names." She stared at him, trembling, her voice shaking with fury. "You are no king! You are a beast!" Ebuka laughed. "Be careful what you say, girl. I have buried the mouths of men for less." That night he took her by force. There were no words, no poetry, no music, just silence and the sound of her pain echoing in the golden chamber where countless others had suffered before her. When morning came, Chidinma was thrown out of the palace gates like waste. No escort, no food, no shame. She stumbled home, her body bruised and her soul cracked. Her mother, sensing her return, opened her arms and held her as she sobbed. The sky wept with her that day, pouring rain across the village. The people of Umuozu whispered when they saw her. Some pitied, others blamed, but only Chidinma knew the truth. She had been chosen not by fate, but by the cruelty of a man who had never been told no. What none of them knew was that within her womb, a tiny heart had already begun to beat. a child that would carry the weight of sorrow and the mark of vengeance. Weeks passed, then months. The days in Umuozu moved with the quiet rhythm of village life. But for Chidinma, time had splintered into before and after. Before the palace, after the pain. She stayed mostly indoors now. Her mother, Mama Olanma, blind yet perceptive, noticed the shift before anyone else. She heard it in her daughter's silences, felt it in her slowed movements, sensed it in the nights when Chidinma would cry softly into her wrapper, thinking no one was listening. And then one morning, Mama Olanma asked the question, "Chidinma, is there a child?" The girl froze where she knelt, scrubbing cassava by the fire. Her hands stopped moving. She could no longer hide it. Her belly had begun to round. "Yes," she whispered. There was a long silence. Mama Olanma, though blind, reached forward and gently touched her daughter's stomach. Her hands trembled. "Whose child?" Chidinma hesitated. Then she said the name like a curse. "Ebuka." The old woman let out a sound that was neither a gasp nor a cry, just a breath sucked violently from her lungs. She clutched her chest and sat back, face drawn in horror. "Oh, my daughter." The following weeks were a blur of shame and struggle. The village knew. Of course they did. The whispers returned, worse than before. She let the king have her. No wonder she was acting holy. Let her go and beg to be made his wife. She's carrying a prince if he doesn't kill her first. But Chidinma did not return to the palace. Not even to plead. The very thought of standing before King Ebuka again filled her with dread. And he never sent word. Never asked. Never showed concern. She had been used, discarded, and forgotten. Back in the palace, King Ebuka was already drunk with new pleasures. Another girl had caught his eye, the daughter of a wealthy merchant from across the river. His harem expanded. His appetite grew. Chidinma? A passing amusement. A mouth too sharp, a spirit too stubborn. He told his guards never to mention her name again. "Let her raise the bastard if she wants," he had said one night, lounging in his chambers. "Or throw it into the river, I care not." No one dared remind him that the child could one day carry royal blood. The palace priests said nothing. The counselors, paid in gold and fear, said less. And the king ruled on. Back in the poor quarters of Umuozu, Chidinma's stomach swelled as the child grew. There was no midwife. None wanted to offend the king. No healer. Only Mama Olanma's hands, her knowledge of roots, and Chidinma's own quiet strength. On a quiet Harmattan morning when the winds were dry and sharp, she went into labor. The pain was unbearable, more than any young girl should bear alone. But she did. She bit down on a cloth to silence her screams so that the neighbors wouldn't come with their judgment. Hours later, soaked in sweat and tears, she delivered a baby boy. She named him Obina, father's heart. A name she chose not for the man who sired him, but for the truth that no matter how unwanted, every child deserved to be seen. Obina was a small, quiet baby with wide eyes that seemed to see too much. Chidinma nursed him while fighting fever and fatigue. Her body, still aching from labor, struggled to recover. She had no medicines. Her breasts were sore. Some days she ate only roasted yam. Her mother did what she could, but the hut was crumbling, and the world was colder than ever. The fever came one night, swift and strong. Chidinma had been coughing for days, but now her skin burned. She drifted in and out of consciousness, clutching Obina to her chest. "I'm cold, Mama," she whispered, again and again. Mama Olanma tried to warm her with blankets, herbal steam, and prayer, but it was no use. On the 7th night after Obina's birth, Chidinma began to shake violently. Her eyes rolled back. Her breaths became shallow. "Don't go, my daughter," her mother pleaded, holding her hand. "Don't leave your son alone." But Chidinma was already far away, her lips forming a final prayer. "Let the gods see me." And then she was gone. Her body was buried behind their hut, wrapped in a faded wrapper, with her baby boy lying beside her body until the cries brought a neighbor running. Obina lived, but his mother did not, and the earth, upon receiving her broken body, did not rest easy. At the palace, King Ebuka celebrated another festival. Drums thundered, wine flowed, his new wife was pregnant. He laughed loudly beneath the stars, surrounded by dancers and praise singers. He had forgotten Chidinma, forgotten the night, forgotten the child. But the spirit world had not. As the dancers circled him and the fires crackled, a sudden gust of wind swept through the courtyard. The flames flickered, the wine pots trembled, and in the shadows behind the pillars, a figure watched, silent, invisible, and waiting. The baby cried endlessly on the morning after Chidinma's death. His voice pierced the air like a warning bell to a world that had already failed him. Obina was barely a week old, a bundle of soft flesh and searching eyes, yet already orphaned by the choices of power and pride. Mama Olanma, blind and grieving, groped for the child with trembling hands. Her world, already dark since the loss of her sight, had now grown colder. Her daughter, her only light, was gone. But the child remained, her daughter's child. A piece of Chidinma, a breathing memory. With no money, no medicine, and barely any strength, Mama Olanma took Obina into her arms and swore that she would raise him the way Chidinma would have wanted, with dignity. But life had no mercy for the poor. In the weeks that followed, food became scarce. The neighbors who used to greet them turned their faces away. Everyone knew who Obina's father was, yet no one dared bring the matter to the palace. After all, who would challenge the Lion of Umuozu over a ghost of a girl buried behind a mud house? Mama Olanma begged, worked, and prayed. She sang lullabies to Obina at night, telling him stories of his mother. "Your mother was light," she whispered, "too bright for this world." Obina would coo and reach up, as though trying to grasp the voice. Still, sickness crept into the house like a thief. The baby's stomach bloated from hunger. His skin became pale, and Mama Olanma's body began to bend from the weight of grief and fatigue. But the real change didn't start in the child. It started in the wind. It began subtly. A strange coldness settled over the house, even when the sun was high. At night, when Mama Olanma rocked Obina to sleep, she would feel something brush her shoulder, like a passing breath. Sometimes the sound of soft weeping echoed from the corner of the room, and she would whisper, "Chidinma, is that you?" On the 40th day after the girl's burial, the air grew thick. A foul wind howled across Umuozu. Chickens stopped laying. Goats refused to eat. The market was emptier than usual, and even the town crier's gong sounded hollow when it rang. That night, a royal servant arrived at the palace trembling with terror. "I heard a woman crying in the queen's chamber," he told the king's steward. "But when I went in, no one was there." The steward slapped him. "Don't speak of ghosts." But the story spread. Within a few days, strange things began to happen inside the palace. One of the king's wives woke up screaming, claiming she saw a woman in white hovering above her bed, cradling a child wrapped in bloodied cloth. Another wife miscarried suddenly, her baby stillborn without warning, her womb twisted in agony. A young concubine ran out of her quarters in the middle of the night, covered in scratches, shouting, "She touched me! She touched me!" King Ebuka at first laughed it off. "Women are full of dreams and madness," he said. But soon even his bravado began to falter. He began waking up at odd hours drenched in sweat, the scent of scent leaf and clay filling his nostrils, Chidinma's scent. One morning, as he bathed in the royal pond, the water turned cold, ice-like, and he heard a voice whisper in his ear. "You forgot me." He spun around. No one was there. The palace priest was summoned. He chanted, poured libations, slaughtered a white goat, and declared, "A spirit walks among us, a woman wronged. Her soul will not rest." "Then cast her out!" Ebuka barked. The priest shook his head. "This is not a spirit you can bribe or banish. She wants something." "What?" "Justice." The king's eyes darkened. He rose from his throne. She got what she deserved. A girl with a sharp tongue should not have dared refuse me." The priest said nothing, only bowed and left. But that night, the oil lamp in Ebuka's chamber went out on its own. He lit it again, and it flickered back to life. He turned, and there she was, standing in the shadows. Chidinma. Her face was pale, eyes hollow, her white wrapper stained with red at the hem. She carried Obina in her arms, the baby's eyes glowing like coals. "You killed me," she whispered. Ebuka screamed. The guards rushed in, but found only the king, alone and trembling, his robe soaked in urine. He would not sleep that night. Or the next. Back in the village, Mama Olanma sat outside with Obina, whispering into the wind. "I know you are near, my daughter. I know you see your son." That night, for the first time since Chidinma died, the baby slept peacefully, wrapped in a soft glow, as if a hand stroked his forehead from beyond. But the palace knew no peace. One by one, the king's women began to vanish. Some fled, others went mad. A few were found dead in their rooms, faces twisted in terror, mouths frozen in silent screams. Ebuka called for diviners. He made sacrifices. He poured palm oil across the palace gates. But nothing worked, because the haunting wasn't from a ghost. It was from a mother who had begged for help and was denied. A woman who had cried in labor, alone, while the man who caused her pain drank palm wine beneath gold ceilings. The spirit of Chidinma would not rest, not while her son slept in poverty and the man who ruined her lived like a god. The palace would soon learn what happens when a king defies not just his people, but the spirit of a woman scorned. The harmattan blew stronger than usual that season. Dust coated the thatched roofs, and the air turned brittle. But in Umuozu, it wasn't just the cold wind that unsettled the people. It was the whispers. Every night they crept through the trees, across compounds, and into ears. The faint sound of a woman crying, a baby wailing in the distance, doors creaking open though no one was there. It was as if the land itself was mourning. In the palace, the haunting escalated. King Ebuka had not slept in days. His eyes sank into his skull. He jumped at every sound, dismissed every guard he suspected of betrayal, and covered every mirror in the palace. For he had begun to see her face reflected in them, blood trickling down her chin, eyes wide with sorrow and rage. He kept priests close, lighting incantations day and night. One night, desperate, he summoned the high priest of Omo, a dreaded spiritualist from a distant land. The old man came barefoot, wearing nothing but cowries and red chalk on his skin. His eyes were blind like Mama Olanma's, but his voice was thunder. He stood in the palace courtyard, sniffed the air, and said simply, "The dead is not lost. She is home." Ebuka's voice shook. "Can she be driven out?" The priest turned to him slowly. "You do not drive out what you invited in. You lay it to rest, and resting requires truth." Meanwhile, in the far end of the village, Obina began to grow. The baby who once cried endlessly now watched the world with an eerie calmness. At just 5 months, he began to mimic sounds, his eyes often following things that no one else could see. Mama Olanma noticed that whenever she sang to him, the wind outside would shift, as though something or someone was listening. She wasn't surprised. She could feel Chidinma everywhere. Sometimes, when Obina laughed in his sleep, Mama Olanma would reach out and feel warmth beside him, the invisible presence of his mother watching over him. But the real sign came the night Mama Olanma woke to the sound of pounding drums. There were no drummers, no music, just the sound echoing in her chest. She stepped outside, and the wind wrapped around her like an embrace. A voice came to her, soft, broken, familiar. He must answer, or more blood will spill. It was Chidinma. That same night in the palace, chaos erupted. The main palace gate slammed shut on its own. The guards were locked out. Fires went out in unison. One of the king's senior wives, Queen Moreniki, was found unconscious in the courtyard, her mouth stuffed with bitter leaf, her hands cold. They rushed her inside. She didn't wake for hours. When she finally stirred, her eyes fluttered open and she began to scream. "She said the boy is cold. She said the boy is hungry." "Who?" the other wives asked. Queen Moreniki clawed at her own skin. Chidinma! She walked through the wall. Her feet never touched the ground. She wept blood. She said her child is crying in the dark. The entire palace held its breath. Ebuka stumbled back, gripping his throne. "She's come for me," he whispered. By morning, 3 guards had fled the palace. The head cook refused to enter the king's chambers. The chief priest tied protective charms at every door, but even he confessed that the presence could not be bound. "She is no ordinary spirit," he told the council. "She is a woman scorned, a mother made a shadow. She doesn't want to haunt. She wants justice." And justice could not be bought with goats or colonut. Justice had a name: Obinna. King Ebuka summoned his council. "What do I do?" he barked, voice hoarse. "Should I send for the boy?" There was silence. No one dared to answer. Then one old chief, Umuozu, cleared his throat and spoke slowly. "You took her body, Igwe, and left her soul wandering. You spilled your seed and abandoned your harvest. Now the earth has remembered." Ebuka's fist slammed the table. "I am the king!" But even he no longer believed it. Power meant nothing when shadows walked through walls. The next morning, word was sent quietly to Mama Olanma. A royal escort arrived, not with force this time, but with bowed heads. "The king wishes to see the boy." Mama Olanma, old and blind but unshaken, held Obinna tightly. "I will not bring him to the palace," she said. "If the king wants to see his son, let him kneel on the same earth he bled the mother on." The guards left, unsure what to report. That night, King Ebuka sat alone in his chambers. Then, without warning, the walls began to bleed. Crimson streams poured from the carved wood, pooling on the marble floor. His bed shook. The mirrors cracked. A low cry echoed from every corner. And there she was again, Chidinma. Only this time she was not angry. She was mourning. "Why?" she asked, her voice like wind through dry leaves. "Why didn't you come for me? Why didn't you come for him?" Ebuka dropped to his knees. "I didn't know. I didn't think." "You never think, you take." She held Obinna in her ghostly arms. The baby's eyes stared straight at his father, unblinking. "You left him in darkness, but he is light. You are the darkness now." And then, like smoke, she vanished. By morning, King Ebuka emerged from the palace barefoot. He wore no crown, no robe, just a simple wrapper. He walked alone through the streets of Umuozu. The people watched in silence as their king, proud, powerful, untouchable, made his way to the poorest part of the village, to the home of the blind woman. When he reached the hut, he stood at the doorway and called out, "Olanma, I am here." Inside, Mama Olanma rose slowly. She held Obinna in her arms. "I cannot see your face," she said calmly, "but I can smell your shame." Ebuka knelt. "I was wrong," he whispered. "I failed her. I failed the boy. Are you here for redemption or release?" "I don't know." "Then you are not ready." She shut the door, and the king wept. For 3 days the king did not return to the palace. He stayed in a small shrine on the outskirts of Umuozu, fasting. No wine, no wives, no food except the bitter roots offered by the shrine's keeper, a mute priest who never spoke, only watched. The villagers whispered, "The king is broken. He walks among us like a beggar. He fears the ghost." But deeper than fear was something else: guilt. King Ebuka, once a man of pride and appetite, had finally met the weight of his sins. Each night in the shrine he saw her, Chidinma, not screaming, not wailing, but standing with eyes that pierced him to the soul. "Your shame is not your punishment," she said in one vision. "Your punishment is that you live, knowing you killed what was pure." Obinna's eyes haunted him too, wide, innocent, but ancient, as though the boy carried the memory of pain in his blood. Back in the village, Mama Olanma watched the shifts with quiet wisdom. People began to visit her, first out of curiosity, then guilt, then reverence. "You were right," they told her. "The king sinned." She said nothing in return. Her only focus was Obinna, but even she knew that the child would not be safe forever. One afternoon, while she nursed him beneath a mango tree, a woman from the palace approached. She was thin, with tired eyes and trembling hands. one of the king's former concubines. "They sent me to speak for the council," she said. Mama Olanma turned her blind eyes toward her. "Speak then. They wish to ask if the boy will be taken to the palace, raised among his people, taught the ways of kingship." Mama Olanma's lips curled slightly. "He already has people, and he has already been taught the ways of kings by what was done to his mother." The woman bowed her head in shame. Still, the request sparked something in the wind. That night, Chidinma returned to Mama Olanma in a dream. Her form was clear, gentle, glowing like morning mist. "Let him go," she whispered. Mama Olanma wept in her sleep. "But I love him." "I know. That is why you must let him walk into his name." The next morning, the old woman called for the palace guard. "Tell the king," she said, "that Obina will visit the palace, but not as a bastard, as a prince, and he must come and receive him himself, on his knees." When the message was delivered, the court fell silent. "A king? Kneel?" But Ebuka said only one thing: "Prepare the path." That evening, the entire kingdom of Umuozu lined the dusty roads as King Ebuka walked barefoot once more. He wore white, his head was shaved, his hands held a wooden staff, not for power, but for humility. He reached Mama Olanma's compound and knelt before her hut. "I am ready," he said. The old woman stepped out with Obina strapped to her back. Slowly, she unwrapped the baby and placed him in the king's arms. Ebuka held the child as if holding a flame, delicate and powerful. The baby did not cry, he simply stared. And in that moment, something shifted in the air. The wind softened. The birds sang again. And in the distance, the sun broke through the clouds for the first time in weeks. Ebuka looked up. "Forgive me," he whispered. And though she was unseen, Chidinma heard it. The following week, a special gathering was held in the palace courtyard. Drums returned, not of celebration, but of solemn transition. Obina was declared the son of the king with full rights. The villagers watched, some amazed, others unsure, but no one protested. Ebuka made a vow before the gods, the ancestors, and the people. "I will raise him not as an heir to my throne, but as a reminder of who I was and who I must become." He invited Mama Olanma to live within the palace walls. She declined. "I was born in the dust," she said. "I will die in the dust, but I will send herbs and prayers for the child." They parted with tears. And that night, when Ebuka stood alone in the palace garden, she came. Chidinma, not in anger, not in sorrow, but in peace. She stood by the garden's edge, holding her own image in ghostly arms. "Thank you," she whispered. "For what?" "For finally seeing him, for seeing me." He fell to his knees. "I will carry this guilt forever." "No, you will carry him." She smiled faintly, and then her form dissolved like dew in the morning sun. Ebuka was alone, but this time, the silence was gentle. Obina grew quickly. He did not speak often, but when he did, the palace listened. His words were wise, his questions deep. Some said he carried the soul of his mother, others said he was watched over by the gods. The servants who once feared the palace now walked freely again. The flowers that once wilted bloomed again. And King Ebuka? He ruled with restraint. He married no more women. He treated his wives as equals and sought the counsel of women elders, including Mama Olanma, whose words were now carried by messengers weekly to the palace. Years passed. The king aged, and one evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills, he called Obina to his side. "I once believed I could take anything I wanted," he said, "but your mother taught me something far greater. That power is not what you take, it's what you return." Obina nodded. "I will not wear your crown," the boy said quietly. Ebuka raised a brow. "Why not?" "I will not rule men. I will heal them. I will bring peace to the broken." Ebuka smiled, the deepest he had smiled in decades. The child of sorrow had become the prince of healing. And far beyond the palace walls, in the whispering trees and the rising breeze, a soft, contented laugh echoed through the wind. Chidinma had finally found rest. Years passed in Umuozu like the rhythm of a slow drum, steady, timeless, and echoing with memory. The story of Chidinma, the ghost who haunted the palace, slowly faded from daily gossip. but it never left the hearts of those who had seen the king fall to his knees in shame. The villagers still spoke her name in hushed tones, especially when Harmattan blew in thick and strange. Children whispered her story at night, daring each other to walk past the mango tree where her spirit had once been seen. King Ebuka had changed. Gone were the lavish feasts, the drunken laughter, the endless flow of women paraded before him. The palace now echoed with the laughter of children from his existing wives, and above all the thoughtful voice of Obinna, who was growing into a quiet force, just like the mother he never knew. But silence, even when it settles like peace, never forgets how to speak. One rainy evening, while the king sat under the ancestral baobab tree with Obinna, the boy asked him a question that made the old king tremble. "Did you ever love her?" Ebuka looked into the boy's eyes, his mother's eyes. The rain tapped the leaves gently above them. A toad croaked in the distance. The scent of wet earth rose around them. "I didn't know how," Ebuka admitted. Obinna said nothing, but the way he looked at the king, without anger, without forgiveness, only understanding, felt heavier than judgment. "She was the only one who dared to say no," Ebuka continued. "That was her crime. That was my weakness." "Then why did you return for me?" "Because I saw her again, not the ghost, the woman, and I saw what I destroyed. You were all that was left of her." Obinna nodded. "But I am not just what she left behind," he said softly. "I am what she became." By the time Obinna turned 16, he had become known across the eastern lands as a boy of light. He healed animals with his hands. He calmed violent men with words. He spent his days not inside the palace halls, but walking among the poor, feeding the sick, telling stories to children, and learning the language of plants from his grandmother, Mama Olanma, who still refused to move into the palace. She must grow from the same soil that tried to bury her, the old woman told anyone who asked why she lived in a hut while her grandson had become a prince. One day, a message arrived from the neighboring village of Ogwashi. A girl had fallen ill, speaking in tongues, floating above her bed, crying out in voices not her own. The local priest had declared it a spiritual possession. Nothing could help her. Obinna stood up, took only a mat, a gourd of water, and walked to the village. When he entered the hut, the girl screamed in a voice not hers. "He took me!" Obinna knelt beside her. He placed a hand on her forehead. "You are not forgotten," he whispered. The girl convulsed once, then went still. When she awoke, she was quiet, but her eyes had cleared. She stared at Obinna as if she'd known him all her life. "Who are you?" she asked. He smiled. "A story my mother never got to finish." Meanwhile, King Ebuka's health had begun to fail. His legs swelled, his breath grew short. He no longer sat on the throne for long hours. He spoke in whispers now. His wives tended to him gently, but they saw the truth. The lion of Umuozu was fading. One night he summoned Mama Olanma to the palace. "I do not wish to die before the boy becomes a man," he told her. "You already died," she said, voice hard, "the moment you abandoned my daughter." He coughed. "Do you still hate me?" "I never hated you," she replied. "I feared what my daughter saw in you, and I wept when I saw it destroyed her." Ebuka looked down. "She is still in this palace, you know. I feel her." "I know," Mama Olanma said, "because she has not left." That night the winds returned. The palace groaned. Torches flickered. Doors slammed on their own. But this time the ghost was not Chidinma. It was memory, her story becoming part of the palace's very bones, a warning to future kings, a reminder of past sins. The palace priest, now very old, declared, "This spirit does not want blood. It wants memory. As long as her name is spoken, she will rest." So the king did what no king had ever done before in Umuozu. He declared a festival, not for war or harvest or gods, but for a woman. The Festival of the Forgotten was held on the 17th of the planting moon. Villagers from all across the eastern region came to witness it. A statue was unveiled in the palace garden, not of a goddess or queen, but of a simple woman holding a child. Chidinma. Beside her, etched into stone, were the words, "She said no, and she paid with everything, but now we remember." Obina stood beside the statue, dressed not in royal robes, but in a plain white wrapper. He spoke gently, clearly, so that even the smallest children could understand. This is not just for my mother. This is for every woman silenced, buried, abandoned, or broken. We will never forget again. And when he finished, the wind rose, cool, gentle, and full of scent leaf. Some say they saw her just for a moment, a woman standing beside her son, smiling. Instead, there was silence. And in that silence, the people remembered. They remembered the king who once ruled with greed and died with humility. They remembered Chidinma, not just as a ghost, but as a woman who changed a kingdom without lifting a weapon. Obina refused to be named king. Instead, he became keeper of the oath, the living reminder of what happens when power forgets humanity. In the years that followed, Umuozu became a kingdom of balance. Women sat on the royal council. Young girls went to school under new village laws. No woman was forced into palace service again, and the festival of the forgotten grew larger each year. Daughters danced with the names of their grandmothers written on their arms. Sons wept beside their mothers' graves. Men who had once been proud now knelt in apology before wives they had silenced. Obina led the ceremonies, and every year, before the festival, he returned alone to that old mango tree where Mama Olanma had once nursed him. The tree had aged, like everything else, but it still stood. One year, he brought his own daughter there. She was 5, with her mother's laugh and her grandmother's stubborn chin. "Who is the statue of in the palace?" she asked him. Obina looked at her, then up into the sky. "That," he said, "is the woman who taught a king how to cry, and taught the world how to remember." Epilogue. Wind never dies. 400 words. The wind never left Umuozu. It still moved through the trees at night, still brushed against cheeks like unseen fingers, still carried whispers. But now, they were different. Not cries, not curses, but blessings. "Mama Chidinma," they called her, the queen of shadows, turned light. She had become more than a ghost. She had become legend. And Obina? He aged too, like all men do. He never wore a crown, but when he died at the age of 74, the entire eastern region came to mourn him. They buried him beside his mother's statue, as he had requested. His grave bore a single line: "I was born of silence, but I spoke for the forgotten." And above his resting place the wind danced, just like it always had. Because wind never dies, and neither does memory.
Don't forget to like and subscribe.